A very warm and cordial morning to all the participants of this 5-day faculty development program on global perspectives in literature and world cinema. On the second day today, like yesterday, we are all keen to present before you a galaxy of speakers who will ignite the spirit of new perspectives in literature and cinema. Let me introduce the first speaker of the day, Dr. T. Marks. Dr. T. Marks is Professor, Department of English, Pondicherry University, Puducherry. He specializes in drama, comparative literature, subaltern studies, and translation. His area of research interests include drama, cultural studies, and subaltern historiography. He has published 15 books in English and Tamil, 15 international and 17 national papers in English, and 7 papers in Tamil, and has a teaching experience of 20 years. He is a member of the panel of confidential work at the UPSC New Delhi, member of the preliminary panel for the award of Bal Sahitya Puraskar 2012, Sahitya Academy in English. He has also been a member of the preliminary panel for the award of Yuva Puraskar 2011, Sahitya Academy in English, member of the preliminary panel for the award of Sahitya Academy in English 2009, member of the selection committee of Indira Gandhi Arts and Science College, Kathikarmam in Puducherry. He has been the member of the Board of Studies of several institutions, referee for educating research papers in disability studies, subject expert for curriculum development in Tamil Nadu, State Council of Education Research and Training, subject expert of the interview panel for the selection of assistant professors of English for Christian College, Kattakada, Kerala, member of the evaluation panel for PhD in University of Hyderabad, the English and Foreign Languages University, Calicut University, University of Kerala, B.R. Ambedkar Open University, Goa University, and several other renowned universities. Professor Marks is the editorial assistant for the International Journal of South Asian Studies, editorial board member of Literary Innovations and International Literary Journal, associate editor for Manas, a literary journal. He has designed the syllabi for media studies, Dalit literature, print culture, contemporary literature and culture, visual culture and communication, and disability studies. He has contributed as the coordinator of the Research and Journal Elite Forum 2008 to 2012, editorial assistant for the International Journal of South Asian Studies 2008 to 2010. He has recently translated Humani's Piragu into English, published by Emerald Publishers, Chennai. May I have the privilege to invite Professor T. Marks to speak on the topic, literature and cinema, whither is fled the subaltern voice. Please, sir.
Thank you, Professor Suparna, for that warm welcome note. Respected Professor Indrani Singh Roy, Head Amity School of Languages. Beloved Dr. Moinul Islam, coordinator of this faculty development program on global perspectives in literature and world cinema. Dear Professor Suparna Kakon, the chair of the session. Dear colleagues, Dr. Shilpa Anand from BITS Pilani and Dr. Khairun Nisha from Maulana Azad National Urdu University, who are going to deliver their speeches after me. Dr. Shubhankar Roy, Dr. Pratyush Ranjan Padi, and learned faculty members and scholars from various colleges and universities. Very good morning to you all. Well, it's with great pleasure and honor that I may now introduce to you the topic of my lecture today. Pursuing English literature at the postgraduate or the research level was often mistakenly thought to be about revisiting literary giants like William Shakespeare, John Milton, Keats, Rabindranath Tagore, and Bharati, who once interpreted human experience in this world. But now of late in the post 2000, in the new millennium, literary studies has become interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary in all possible ways. Say, for example, when we discuss medical imperialism in health humanities, we discuss how human lives in an era of globalization have come under medical authority and scrutiny. So health is no longer a personal priority within families. Traditional remedies and practices are lost as corporatized healthcare systems in connivance with the states lead to over-reliance on doctors and multi-speciality hospitals. So what happens today is an illness that could once be solved within the family sphere, inside your house, within four walls, is now shifted to a public domain. So one who enters a multi-speciality hospital for an ordinary headache comes out with some 10-20 pages of prescription plus scanned copies and other things. So literary theory as a corollary of the empirical insight is the body of ideas and methods used in the practical reading of literature. So literary theory for reading of literature is as natural as, say, yeast unto bread. So it initially locates literature as a system of knowledge and refers to other disciplines of knowledge that on purpose operate upon the author, the text, and the reader. So it has always implied or directly expressed a conception of the world outside the text. Therefore, literary theorists trace the history and the evolution of the different genres, narrative structures, discourse of the text, highlighting the fact that knowledge is power. So as Jean-Paul Sartre says, all writing is political. Be it a leave letter or a love letter, writing as a way of reading the society involves intra and interpersonal hermeneutics of the other, the reader, encrypting and decoding societal consciousness respectively. So scholars through the ages are skeptical about the, say, totalizing notions like greatness, sacredness in great books, in canonical books, and they transcend the doctrinal discourses of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, class, or caste. This is the pedestal on which I am trying to construct my lecture. I repeat the statement. Scholars through the ages are skeptical about the totalizing notions like greatness of literature, sacredness of literature in great books, and they transcend these great books. These canonical texts transcend the doctrinal discourses of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, class, caste, body, everything. So the crucial crisis in literary studies was detected by Jacques Derrida, Deleuze and Guattari, Foucault, Antonio Gramsci, and many others, that in the name of universalizing human experience, these canonical works either thoroughly neglected or trivialized the so-called anesthetic experiences of lay people, common people, the productive classes, the peasants. Hence, it's imperative that literary theories with logical insights are obligatory to comprehend literary texts. So that is an important shift. Here is where I technically begin my lecture on subaltern. There is an important shift in the writing history or the production of history for the first time. So in the 1960s, to be precise, 1966, with E.P. Thompson's influence, experience and culture of the masses were considered as essential categories of history writing or the production of history. Two important things, two important key terms. for the first time in literary history, that the experience and culture of the masses, the working classes, the peasants, the lay people, the common people, these two things were considered as essential categories of history writing. It was E.P. Thompson's essay "History from Below," which was published in 1966, which brought the phrase subaltern historiography to the forefront. So along with him, we have Eric Hobsbawm, George Root, Christopher Hill, and others who started, all of them are contemporaries of E.P. Thompson and disciples of E.P. Thompson, who started emphasizing the role of the disenfranchised, the oppressed, the poor people, the non-conformists, and otherwise marginal groups in the history-making process. So a people's history, or history from below, is a historical narrative from the perspective of common people rather than leaders. So this revolutionary transition is not to be treated as an isolated shift in the field of history or literary studies, but this shift towards the subaltern has happened simultaneously in almost all spheres. For your information, in the field of music, say people started accepting heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter, and hence unheard melodies were given focus in the new millennium. So instead of going for a pure Carnatic, a pure Western, people started making fusions of folk plus Carnatic, classical plus Western. So this kind of unheard music, unheard melodies, which were treated as very much blasphemous, were given focus in the new millennium. The subaltern music forms like folk music and all other music that emerged from the percussion instruments used by common people. Great musicians started incorporating such instruments, such musical notes in the so-called classical music. So it becomes a fusion and it becomes part of the so-called mainstream music. Say in physics, atom is not given importance, rather more importance is given to subatomic particles. Same is the case with psychology. In psychology, consciousness doesn't matter, subconsciousness matters the most. Similarly, in history also, the sub-histories are gaining importance, and the shift in literary studies in the new millennium is from I emphasize this point, is from the global to local, from macro to the micro, from meta to the mini narratives, from elitism to the subaltern. And we need not overlook the universal resonances of local writings or micro narratives or subaltern texts. So in an influential 1986 essay, Third World Literature in the Era of Multinational Capitalism, Frederick Jameson argued that private and public lives are fused in the third world. Private and public lives are fused in the third world, which leads all narratives from this world to become national allegories. So no matter how private they appear to be, say same is the case with the political slogan of the feminists, the personal is political. That clarifies that the personal experiences of women are rooted in their political situation and gender inequality. So the voices from the third and fourth worlds, India is at once a third and a fourth world country. So the voices from the third and fourth worlds are getting resonated across, and a good example is the award of Nobel Prize for Literature to the Tanzanian writer Abdul Razak Gurnah in 2022, and the French writer Annie Arnaud last year. So there, the term subaltern, like Franz Fanon usually says, there comes a time when silence becomes dishonesty. So silence becomes violence. So the term subaltern, as you all know, meaning of inferior rank, is a term adopted by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci to refer to the working class people who are subjected to the hegemony of the ruling classes. Subaltern classes include peasants, workers, and any other socio-cultural groups denied access to the power and its associated privileges. There are multitudes of definitions for the subaltern, but I'm much more convinced with this kind of definition that any socio-cultural group that is denied access to the power and also its associated privileges. Say, for example, if temple is the power, if church is the power, then entry to the temple, entry to church, these are all and related privileges that one enjoys, these associated privileges. This is what I mean by power and its associated privileges. So in his notes on Italian history, Gramsci charts out a comprehensive framework for studying the history of the subaltern classes, like their objective formation, their active and passive affiliation to the dominant political formations, and the forums that the subaltern groups produce to make their claims, and new frameworks that assert the autonomy of the subaltern classes. All these things are part of the subaltern studies. However, the term has been adopted to post-colonial studies by the Subaltern Studies Group, what we call SSG, a team of historians led by Ranajit Guha and aided by Shahid Amin, David Arnold, Pata Chatterjee, Deepesh Chakraborty, Jnanandra Pandey, and others. So, subaltern historiography is a cerebral project associated with Ranajit Guha and his intellectual circle. A dozen edited volumes of historical scholarship on colonial India, which were published between 1982 and 2005, proved to be one of the most influential drift in the historical thought processes in the last decades of the 20th century. It also catapulted the hitherto unexplored orators and neglected voices into textual scholarship. So though the subaltern studies movement or group was primarily associated with a shift from history from above to history from below, say Eagle's point of view to an Athwom's point of view, it also depended on insights from structuralism, post-structuralism, and of course, postmodernism and post-colonialism to a larger extent. Edward Said endorsed the project by way of giving a foreword for the selected subaltern studies volumes edited by Ranajit Guha and Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak. Gayatri Spivak ventured into a noteworthy dialogue with the movement with a critical intervention which is seen as an internal critic within the subaltern studies group. Homi Bhabha was also indirectly negotiating with the movement by trying to state and restate his thesis that the colonist text contains a native voice and hence it is hybrid. To trace the historical evolution of subaltern studies, we need to go back to the new comparative literary studies where in its initiation, in its beginning, comparative literary studies scholars tried comparing two different texts and they were trying to bring out the similarities between two different texts. So when the whole West came out with the idea of art is one, or art should be one as humanity is one, that humanity is not an all-inclusive humanity. It is an exclusive humanity. That humanity which T.S. Eliot was referring to as that humanity is the European Christian humanity, which excludes the Arabs, which excludes the Indians, which excludes the Chinese, which excludes everybody else who is non-Western. So they were trying to do some kind of a political exercise in the name of comparative literary studies to bring out the idea that despite differences in terms of in terms of language and other things, in terms of geographical boundaries, all European Christian humanity is one, and hence literature should be one. So these people, the prime objective of these scholars is to trace the similarities between texts, one from German, one from English, one from Danish, one from French. So this kind of, they never ever chose texts from outside Europe. So the context remained European. So this kind of a thing was brought, and they were never ever bothered about, talking about the differences between the texts. So the intervention of the non-Western academics in the Western academia, especially three important non-Western intellectuals who got directly connected with the Western academia, Homi Bhabha, Edward Said, and Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak. They came out with a very important complaint that the West versus the rest. There is a dichotomy of West and the rest in any kind of an academic exercise that involves comparative literary studies. But then the subaltern studies group, especially Antonio Gramsci, and in the Indian context, Ranajit Guha, they also detected one more thing within this West versus rest dichotomy. Even if we accept the West as very hegemonic and the rest as the submissive, within this rest, there is another West versus rest dichotomy, that there is another elitist versus the subaltern dichotomy within the rest itself, within the third world countries, within the post-colonial countries, within the colonized people, there is an elitist group and there is a subaltern group. So the predominant finding of the subaltern studies group is that there is a thick veneer that separates the elite from the subaltern. While the elitist activities were recognized as political, as very serious, as solemn, the subaltern activities were generally disregarded by historians and scholars invariably as primitive. So this is where the political versus the primitive. So this dichotomy develops. When the elites indulged in a social rebellion, the historians branded it as protest, whereas when the peasants and tribals or Dalits protested, they branded it as social unrest. Because these marginalized groups did not follow the established rules of politics, like writing officially to the colonial state, negotiating with them, and then going on a protest. All these rules and regularities, they never followed. So historians dwarfed the violent protests of peasants and tribals, ascribing them to purely economic motives. It's like during the election time, people very randomly, very casually, without any kind of consciousness, they say that if someone provides a pack of biryani and some 500 rupees, they'll vote for. So this kind of ascribing some kind of economic motives to the very serious violent protests of peasants and tribals is something that needs to be looked into very seriously. So Guha argues that their uprisings are not to be treated as unpolitical, as they staked precise claims against colonial authority and the authority of landlords and local moneylenders. So that's why even the project of nationalism had been a middle-class affair. And the leadership of the nationalist movement used the strength of mass mobilization on one hand. And on the other hand, it used the movement to keep subaltern militancy in check. I give you a classic example. When Indira Gandhi was happy with the LTTE movement, or as long as Indira Gandhi was happy with the LTTE movement of Sri Lanka, The Congress party called the movement a liberation movement with an emancipatory idea, with an emancipatory politics. But when the same movement turned against its leader, Rajiv Gandhi, the same party called the movement a terrorist movement. So same thing you can see in Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, when she tries to put forth this idea through her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? It raises some serious concerns, like first and foremost, there is a romanticization of trivial mass uprisings. She very brilliantly argues these historians had assumed that all forms of resistance and popular action had an emancipatory potential. Say, for example, there is a work, the Clarinda by Madhavaya, which is one of the earliest texts in Indian writing in English. There is a woman called Gokila, who is a Marathi Brahmin girl child, who got settled in the southern part of Tamil Nadu, Tanjore. She was married to a boy. It's a marriage, what you call a child marriage, and her husband passes away. So as part of the program of Sati, Gokila was about to be thrown to the funeral pyre of her child husband, who is no more. So when she was about to be thrown to the funeral pyre as part of the Sati project, it was Lord Littleton, a British general from Tanjore, who was roaming there in his horse. He comes close to the funeral pyre and he rescues the girl Gokila, and then he rescues her and he flees. Then she falls in love with Lord Littleton and she converts herself to Clarinda. Subsequently, Lord Littleton also passes away. Then she started propagating the gospel across Tamil Nadu, and there are churches named after Clarinda today. This is what Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak was referring to as trivial forms of resistance and popular action having an emancipatory potential. Secondly, the historians' attempt to represent the subaltern resistance was itself an act of discursive power. The subaltern historians' assumption of the right to speak for the oppressed. So it brings in the politics of representation. Who should represent whom, and can an elite person represent the subaltern? Can a man represent a woman? Can an able-bodied person represent the disabled? Can a gendered person represent a transgender? These questions Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak raises in the second part of it. And thirdly, Spivak traces the male bias of subalternist research as the leading members of the collective, the subaltern studies group, were all men who often ignore the life experiences of subaltern women. This is also an internal critique that found its space within the what you call the movement, subaltern studies group. So subaltern studies and historians associated with it increasingly moved towards a new dominant concern, the critique of Eurocentrism in history writing. So historical scholarship used tropes and methods which implicitly recognized Western historical development as the norm against which other historical experiences needed to be measured. So the working class in the post-war Europe and its subsequent expansion of the industrial class organized themselves formidably in such a way that they could engage in a large-scale challenge to ruling regimes and to the capitalist system. So in all discourses, there is an elitism, even in nationalism, in capitalism, in subalternity, where invisible becomes visible. I give you a very small anecdote to prove this point forward. A small anecdote which all of you must be familiar with. A mathematics teacher asked a village girl, a villager has kept 20 sheep in the sheepfold and left them overnight. 2 sheep jumped out of the pan, and how many will be remaining in the sheepfold? And the girl replied, no sheep will be there. The teacher got angry because he's a mathematics teacher, and he repeated the question. Again, the girl said, none will be there. When he was about to beat her with his whip, she replied that, dear teacher, you know better mathematics, but I know the nature of the sheep. After all, when we were hunting country chicken from the neighbors' fields and smoking and roasting it raw, the whole world called the indigenous people barbarians. And the same thing is done in star hotels, and these people are selling it as barbecue. So the question of aesthetic that haunts the subaltern studies movement, or the question of aesthetic that the mainstream, the canonical criticism, aims at, or targeting the subaltern literary sources is always a problematic question. So, for example, you have the twin epics Ramayana and Mahabharata. Anybody can sum up Ramayana in 3 sentences, that Ram's wife was kidnapped by Ravan, and Ram waged a war against Ravan to rescue Sita, and subsequently Ravan was defeated and Ram won the battle. But then there are many versions of the same kind of epic, which also includes the subaltern aspect of Ramayana, the subaltern perspective to Ramayana. There is a wonderful text called Ravana Kavyam. It is authored by the Dravidian movement, where there is a Ravan's point of view of Ramayana, and you have Sitayaniyam, where you have Sita's point of view of Ravan when Ram was asked to asking Sita to cross the ordeal of holy fire. She says, no issue, Ram, let us join hands and we'll cross the holy ordeal of fire together, because you were also away from me for a longer time. So this kind of an alternate subaltern perspective is also readily available. And there is a wonderful text by Poyles and Gupta, Thus Spake Shurpanaga, where Shurpanaga was, narrating her own perspective of Ramayana, her own problem. So it's even in the case of canonizing the subaltern voices, like when it comes to the politics of representation, the Indian academia always comes out with the recommendation of the Untouchable by Mulkraj Anand. But then people should also understand that Mulkraj Anand is untouchable. In the novel Untouchable, there is no untouchable at all. There is a manual scavenger who is called Baka in the novel. Gandhi actually called Baka a Bloomsbury intellectual. He was laughing at Baka, and he was ridiculing. He was telling Mulkraj Anand, Mr. Anand, it seems that you have created a Bloomsbury intellectual in the name of a manual scavenger, because there is no sign of a manual scavenger in Baka in the Untouchable. Moreover, the ending of the novel was tailored by Gandhi, and he edited and threw nearly 100 pages of Untouchable, because the whole novel was written by Mulkraj Anand in the ashram of Gandhi. So during, say, this is how the representation of subaltern by an elitist writer becomes a fiasco, because you compare this kind of representation of Manuel Scavenger with that of Sharan Kumar Limbale. Say in his work, Limbale recollects during the harvest season, when cattle was grazing in the fields, they passed undigested grains of jowar in their dung. So the women protagonist Shantamai, she was picking such lumps of dung wherever the cattle move, she just moves and then she picks up all kinds of dung, and on the way home, she washes it in the river water, collecting only the undigested grains of jowar, and she cleans it, she dries it up, she prepares a gruel, and she feeds her children. Such abject poverty is the matter of fact, is the ground reality of the manual scavenging class. Even if you visit any railway station, be it Chennai or Kolkata or Mumbai, it says it all. It has a hotspot for laptops to download your mail. You have mobile phone charges. You have international food counters offering burgers, chocolate mousse, and chow mein next to hot dosas and chicken tikka. Yet a few meters away, everybody could see a sweeper women cleaning shit in the most primitive manner possible, lifting it out of the railway track with a small stick, broom, and tin sheets. Why does this unacceptable, utterly obscene dichotomy exist? This is the question which every subaltern writer keeps asking. You have a lot of misrepresentation that has been inundating the Indian writing in English. One more example is Indra Parthasarathis is the River of Blood, which was awarded the Sahitya Academy. It is based on a real incident that happened in Tanjore again of Tamil Nadu, where 46 landless peasants, mostly Dalit landless laborers, were burnt alive for asking for 2 more vessels of rice. So in the place of 4 vessels of rice, because they were all unpaid labor, so in turn, they were given 4 vessels of rice, and they were asking for 6 vessels of rice. The very way they asked for 2 more vessels of rice irritated and annoyed the landlords, and they employed mercenaries to kill these Dalit landless laborers, and some 50 people took asylum, when the mercenaries were on a spree for the blood of these peasants. They took asylum in a hut owned by one Mr. Ramaya, and they set ablaze the hut, burning alive 46 landless laborers. 2 of them, they tried to remove the thatched roof, and they jumped out, and they tried to escape this. The mercenaries were so ruthless that they chased them, they picked them up, and again those 2 were thrown into the burning hut. This novel, which narrates this specific incident, Indra Parthasarathi was giving a psychological twist to it, and he was trying to narrate this novel from a psychological perspective, which is one way of dwarfing a very socially significant incident which gave birth to the communist movement in Tamil Nadu as a very trivial incident. That is one reason why scholars like Kancha Ilaya repeatedly warn us that literature of the unproductive becomes anti-human. So this kind of thing you can find all over the mainstream writings, where the representation becomes one-sided, and sometimes there is misrepresentation of the subaltern groups. You have a lot of issues related to the subaltern politics. When it comes to literature, we have these examples of The Untouchable of Mulk Raj Anand, The River of Blood by Indra Parthasarathi, The Scapegoats by K. Gunasekaran, where there is a slide which was projected in the very first scene of the play. So in the slide, there is a discussion between Ambedkar and Mulk Raj Anand. Mulk Raj Anand was wishing Dr. Ambedkar good morning, namaste, Dr. Ambedkar, and he was wishing Dr. Ambedkar with folded hands. But Ambedkar refused to reciprocate, and he says, come on, Mulk Raj Anand, this way of wishing it has a technique of not touching one another. So come on, let me embrace you. And he embraces Mulkraj Anand, he hugs him, and he says, let lotus bloom everywhere. So this kind of a very emancipatory, revolutionary, ideas were shown by these subaltern writers in all their writings. Even when there were voices against the gang rape incidents across India in the new millennium, the Dalit feminist scholars raised serious questions about where were these voices when the tribal women, the Dalit women, were paraded naked and raped by the dominant community members. So it's even today we have honor killings when it comes to the film media. Pa Ranjit, Mari Selvaraj, these young directors are trying to project honor killings and issues related to caste in their films very, very brilliantly. And there is a welcome trend down south, at least, that such films which were marginalized films once now could become blockbusters in all cinema halls. So this kind of a change in the attitude of the audience towards subaltern cinema, or cinema that projects the subaltern life and their experiences and their sufferings and their subjugation, and films which continue to have an emancipatory ideal. These films become blockbuster, which is a welcome step. These films naturally do not fix any enemies for them. There is no enemy for the subaltern. But then the subaltern cries for equality. In his fight for equality, or in their fight for equality, that there is someone whose dominance is disturbed, then he becomes naturally the opposite member, not perhaps the enemy of the subaltern. And when you talk about farmers' suicides, we don't have any mainstream work that deeply discusses the issues of farmers' suicides. Because for the last 15 years and more, 16,000 farmers committed suicide, and it simply appears as a quarter-page news brief in all the national newspapers. Beyond that, nobody bothers about it seriously. Partly because this 16,000 farmers, this number is just a number game, as you find in the National Crimes Bureau. This is a data for many, and this constitutes the landless peasants more so. So this is another. So when the Indian academia was busy talking about diasporic writers, diasporic experiences, diasporic Indians, South Asian diaspora, we tend to forget, or we tend to neglect the sufferings, the genuine life experiences, things to be represented in literature, such as farmer suicides, the gang rapes, the honor killings, all kinds of farmer suicides and other things. So Indian diasporic writings conveniently excluded the Keralites toiling in the oil fields of United Arab Emirates, and Tamils toiling in the sugarcane fields of Africa and tea estates of Sri Lanka and other places. All nationalists left India and they settled in the developed countries, and they started teaching us nationalism through Facebook posts and all social media. So this is something very ironic, that people who are elitists, they find some kind of inconvenience in their own land and they leave India on their own for economic comforts and sophistication, and then they regret or they long for the homeland, which is something very very trivial. But then we have a long list of works that literature students with a lot of social commitment should talk about. Say, for example, this condition of the subaltern is not something which is unique with countries that suffer due to caste. It's everywhere in the name of race, in the name of gender, in the name of class, in the name of caste. You have Langston Hughes, who has a poem not for publication. When he was sitting in a church and he was narrating his own condition in a church, he says the church is white, the priest is white, the paint of the church is white, the pulpit is white, people who are sitting, they are all whites, except me. I am the only black person sitting amidst the white crowd. I have a feeling that a black bug is sitting on a white rose in a church. And he continues the poem and he ends the poem very beautifully, saying that Jesus Christ, my Lord, if, as promised, if you come back to this world, don't come back as the same Jewish white, but come back as an African Moor. Then everything would have changed in this world, but one thing will remain the same, that you will be crucified immediately on your birth because you came back to this world as an African black. So this kind of an angst, a kind of rational agony in the subaltern, which gets vented out through all kinds of literary works, is something very significant. Because we are living in a land of untouchables, we are living in a land of unseeables. We have one specific work called Yimayam's Beasts of Burden, which is a very important work. It's available in English, The Beasts of Burden by Imayam, which talks about a community of washing, it's a washing community, washermen community called Pudirai Vannan. These Pudirai Vannans, these people, they have their donkeys and they carry the whole bundle of the unwashed clothes of the community to the riverbed only during the night. So only during the night, around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, they will enter the river, and then they will wash the entire village clothes and they'll come back before it dawns, because they're unseeables. They shouldn't be seen in public places during daytime. So this kind of Pudirai Vannans do exist in parts of Tamil Nadu. What happens, the head of the family usually is a woman. She comes and knocks the doors of all houses, and the households, they'll just throw the unwashed clothes to this woman. The half door will be open and the clothes will be thrown out, and along with that they'll also offer her the leftover food of the day. So usually this lady knocks the door around 9 o'clock in the night, and she collects all the leftover food from all houses. Then she takes it home and feeds her family. And then they should go to the riverbed and come back before it becomes morning. This kind of, in this specific novel, there is a rape happening in the novel, that a person belonging to the dominant upper caste, he rapes this daughter of the protagonist of Beasts of Burden. And when she was raped, she was begging for her dress from the rapist. And he says, he abuses her with all kinds of abusive slangs and saying that, do you expect me to touch your clothes? He touched her, he raped her. Again, when she was asking for her dress, he passes on this dialogue, who will touch this dirty dress of you untouchable? So this is how a very socially committed writer like Imayam was trying to talk about the hypocrisy of the casteist society and its members. Very recently, there is a place called Vengai Vayal, where dominant community members, they dropped fecal waste into the drinking water overhead tank of the Dalits, and it was consumed by the whole village, and children got affected very badly, and many children developed diarrhea, and then adults. and everybody got admitted to the hospital. And the hospital authorities were wondering why from a specific village, so many diarrhea cases and very serious illness, happens, and they just examined. Then they advised the village elders to check the drinking water tank. When they checked it, fecal waste were dropped inside the overhead drinking water tank. This is how, say, when people talk about trauma studies and all kinds of things, trauma is not something when somebody slaps you, it doesn't remain a trauma. It's not a traumatic experience. It is, of course, painful, but it's not a traumatic experience. But where these kids who drank drinking water which was mixed with fecal waste, they drank it, of course, their life is saved now. But then throughout their life, till they die, whenever somebody offers them with a cup of water, with a glass of water, whenever they sip that glass of water, they'll be reminded of having drunk this kind of a water with fecal waste. And this is what trauma literally means. This is what trauma exactly means. And this traumatic experience, I don't think any other privileged community member would have experienced in his or her lifetime. So this kind of, this doesn't happen in the 1960s, 70s or 80s. This has happened in 2023. So this kind of very social injustice, is happening across. And writers do talk about this kind of a thing today. So this is where the subaltern literature excels, and the subaltern literature genuinely represents the feelings, the angst, the experiences, both aesthetics or the so-called anesthetic, the oral literary experiences of the subaltern through the writings. And same is done by Vechimaran, by Mari Silvaraj, by Paranjit, like directors in the field of cinema also. So there is a tribal way of living. Say, for example, a tribe lives in his house. An indigenous, autochthonous person lives in a small hut. And close to him sleeps his own dog, his cat, his rooster, his hen. Everything sleeps together, and in his doorstep, lies his cows and other things, his cattle. All these animals, that the dog never attacks the cat. The cat never attacks anything else. So they were all very much self-protective, at the same time mutually complementing each other. This kind of a way of living, which is.
Sir, excuse me, sir, you will have to sum up, sir, because
I'm summing it. I'm summing it up. I'm summing it up. So this kind of a life where you have this life which is very much eco-friendly, which is non-exploitative. This kind of a lifestyle, I really wonder anybody else is leading. So this kind of a life which a tribe, which an indigenous person lives, should be respected. If we don't represent them, at least we shouldn't misrepresent them. And let us expect, let us accept and celebrate the differences. Any nation, any society, anybody who doesn't know how to expect, accept, and celebrate the differences, any nation that doesn't expect, accept, and celebrate the differences, there is no scope for its prosperity. So subaltern is a constructed identity. We should challenge and demolish this construct and create an egalitarian space where all voices are heard uniformly. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. Indeed, it was an eye-opening experience for all of us. So before we take questions, just one query I had is like, where do you think is research, especially in the subaltern studies in the context of Indian literature? How far has it come?
Indian English literature or Indian literature per se is a very fertile ground for doing research in the subaltern studies category, or you can even use subaltern studies theories to analyze and to work in any Indian fictional works or in any Indian literature, because subaltern studies per se is more associated with societies which have hierarchically graded inequality. So in that sense, Indian literature, anything that starting with Mulkraj Anand to any text that appeared in 2023, you can subject any text to rigorous scrutiny using subaltern studies thing. And also you can also talk about the Dalit literature or tribal literature or writings related to disability, transgender writings using the subaltern studies theories. So there is a good hope, and there is a large scope for these studies in the Indian context. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions, panelists and people? You can raise your hands if participants desire to ask sir any questions.
This particular speech reminds me a beautiful story by Mahashweta Devi, Daupti. In fact, all the stories, all the novels, all these have this essence of subaltern, but specifically the short story Daupti.
Exactly.
Yes, Suparna, there's so many questions.
Yes. So this question is from Mr. Shubhadeep Jana, and it asks, like, sir, how can we club down the idea of disability and Dalits?
In the case of the disabled, it talks about the society which is very much disabling. Because provided a ramp and a lift, any disabled person can reach the mainstream schools. There is no need for special schools or anything like that, which is discriminatory. Now, people have started abolishing the special school concept, and there is an integration age. We are living in an age of integration where the disabled people are brought back to the mainstream by enabling the disabling environments. This is where disability studies, sums it up, that disability is not inability, but a different way of ability to perform the same things, provided an enabling atmosphere. But in the case of Dalits, the disability becomes social disability, that they are denied of access to all kinds of power and its associated privileges. So this is where the condition of Dalits, tribals, disabled people, women to some extent, and children, transgender, all these people, their condition remains the same, because some way or the other they are denied of an equal access to the resources of the state.
Very right, sir. We have the next question from Mr. Bimaljit Singh, and he asks, sir, the representation of subaltern voices in particular or of any unheard section of the society generally is ensured by several factors. Is it safe to say that economic and educational upliftment are the precursors to the equal representation in cinema and literature, as these ventures need finances and a certain level of literacy?
I partly agree with this, because economic equality doesn't guarantee you social equality in India. You may be an IAS officer, you may be the first person of India, you may be a crorepati, you may be a multimillionaire, but then again, your social status determines your position in the society. So economic equality or economic superiority doesn't guarantee one with social superiority or social equality. So in that way, yes, education guarantees some kind of social upliftment, it's true, but economic upliftment doesn't guarantee social equality. It helps but that alone doesn't guarantee social status or social equality.
So we'll just take another question. It is from Ms. Shweta S. And she asks, sir, you talked about Ranajit and Mari Selvaraj and their contributions. How far do you think their representation in commercial cinema enhances the agency of Dalits within the society?
Very well, because I already informed through my lecture that these directors are not making the so-called art films or alternate films. They are making commercial cinema, and these films have already become blockbuster movies. And in the case of Pa Ranjit, he even made use of the superstar of Tamil cinema, Rajnikant, to project Dalit issues through his films. So all his films were blockbuster films, commercial films. And that's a place where I do agree with the person who raises this question, that it does enhance the agency of Dalits in the commercial cinema.
She also continues asking, how far is the portrayal of Dalits different when portrayed by a Dalit director and that of a non-Dalit director?
It's very simple. It's like an elite director like Maniratnam representing the Dalit issue and Mari Selvaraj talking about Dalit issue. There is a difference. There is a marked difference, that the authenticity, it's a matter of authenticity. When Ranjit talks about Dalit issues, exactly he brings to the commercial cinema halls the genuine sufferings and feelings of the Dalits, and even the lifestyle, the culture of Dalits is very much genuinely portrayed. Whereas in a non-Dalit representation of Dalit, you have a lot of shortcomings, inadequacies are there.
And we'll take this last question, sir. It is by Ms. Anvesha Roy Chaudhary, and she asks, can the refugees during partition be called the subaltern?
Yes, very much. Because the refugees, I have an example that we have Tamil refugees, Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. They are Tamils, but they are refugees in Tamil Nadu, whose condition, they are ghettoized, and they are stigmatized. They don't have any kind of basic identity card in this land. So their condition is worse than that of the Dalits or anybody in this land. So they are actually the subaltern population only.
There's no end of questions, so there's another question which we will take. It is by Miss, I do not know, SD Chakrabarti, and he or she asks, in which ways subaltern issues are fit into the entertainment values of films in India?
Subaltern, as I already referred to, it's more of a pain narrative, and it talks about the problems that emerge out of an unequal social setup. So it is not just a mere entertainer, but when you read some novels like Piece of Burden and all, it doesn't just talk about the sufferings, but it also has a lot of amusing elements that is naturally an inherent part of Dalit life. So humor is there, life is there, so you can enjoy that, but it's not merely an entertainment. Okay.
I just ask again, like, are there any more questions? I can see one question from Pooja R, and she asked, thank you for the wonderful session, sir. And she also asked, can you suggest more works on Shurpanakha?
No, it's by Boyle and Gupta, Thus Spake Shurpanakha. I have come across only one work by Boyle and Gupta, which provides an alternate frame for Ramayana, which is from Shurpanakha's point of view, which is humorous at the same time very seriously political. One can read that, but other than that, I haven't found any text representing Shurpanakha.
So if there are no more questions, then we shall wind up this session. Thank you so much, sir. We have learned lots and lots from you, and we hope that we'll remain connected in future as well to listen to more of your lectures. Thank you so much. May I now introduce the second speaker of the day, Dr. Shilpa Anand. Dr. Shilpa Anand is an associate professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus in India. She has a PhD in disability studies from the University of Illinois at Chicago and an MA in English from the University of Hyderabad. Her research interests include literary and cultural disability studies, the historiography of disability and culturally different concepts of corporeality. Her doctoral work explored the conceptual histories of disability in the Indian context. She moderates a lively email list called Disability Studies India and has co-edited multiple issues on disability for the web magazine Café de Cines. May I invite Dr. Anand to speak on literary cultures of disability. Dr. Anand, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Suparna, for introducing me so kindly. And thank you, Dr. Islam, for inviting me to be a speaker at this faculty development program. Can I share my screen?
Yes, sure, ma'am.
Just give me a second. All right. So it looks like this is one of those faculty development programs that has a good representation of disability studies, since we're talking about representation so much. So I hope that everything I say will not be old for you, since you've already heard Professor Anil Aneja yesterday. But let me just share with you my lecture plan. What I plan to do is disability studies. Going on to talking about these two concepts that I think are very significant to think about. One is normalcy and the other is ableism. Right, and these are concepts that people within disability studies are working on. And finally, I will share a few ideas about cultural expressions of disability, which I'm hoping will include for you literature and cinema. But I'm not drawing on so many cinematic texts. I'll primarily use somewhat traditional literary text to think through all of this. Just give me a second. I want to make sure I don't overshoot the time, so I'm setting a timer. So what is this concept of disability? What are the many ways in which we think about it? For the purposes of today's lecture, let's think of it as another kind of human difference, right? And also think of it in relation to other human differences, in relation to other social differences. I'm very glad to be and honored to be speaking after Professor Marx, who's already set the tone about subalternity. And I think that backdrop is necessary to think about this intersectionality, which is very significant. Secondly, let's think of disability as an umbrella category. You already saw that yesterday in Professor Aneja's lecture, that he's discussing a variety of impairment categories, a variety of disability experiences, and so on. So it's not easily definable, and it should not be easily definable, just because as we move forward in the world, we are also becoming oriented to newer and newer kinds of impairment categories. Long COVID, for instance, which is something that many of us speak about, many of us have had the opportunity to also experience this. I mean, what kind of an opportunity it is needs to be thought about further. But I think then that the repercussions which were experienced as long COVID very differently by different people is also something that comes through here. We also need to keep in mind that disability is defined variously, right? So within the field of rehabilitation sciences and also special education, there are going to be certain kinds of technicist or medicalized ways of knowing disability. And that's because the purpose of those fields is oriented towards rehabilitating, towards educating, and so on. However, with the emergence of fields like MAD studies, you will see that this whole category of the psychiatric disability or the category of psychosocial disability is getting redefined in ways that what we are doing is actually interrogating the oppressive structures, right? And so it's important to engage with these multiple definitions that we're going to continuously come across. We'll also have to reflect on disability as a kind of historical construct, because if one studies disability prior to, let's say, the 20th century, then you're not going to find the word disability or any of its translations in other languages across the archives, right? It's not a category that readily exists, but that does not mean that experiences of disability do not exist. So there are ways in which we will have to think about the way disability is constructed historically differently in many different contexts. So then disability is not a fixed term, it's not a fixed category, it's not a fixed concept, but more like a placeholder term, right? Something that we are using to fill in as we think about a variety of complexities. I also want to pinpoint here, because at some point I hope to talk about language and disability, that this is a term that is preferred by disabled activists and scholars as opposed to differently abled. Right now, the phrase differently abled carries a variety of connotations, and some of the arguments against it from disability activists is that it's very euphemistic, right? It's trying to paper over something, it's trying to hide something, whereas disability is something that's upfront and needs to be that way. Now, I want to think with everyone about the ways in which disability is similar to and different from other categories of social difference. Why is it that we will have to consider disability in relation to caste, class, gender, sexuality, religious minority, and so on? What are the overlaps? What are the interconnections? One of the questions that was posed to Professor Marks was, what is it that you see in the interconnections between disability and Dalitness? So, I mean, I'm paraphrasing the question poorly, but maybe this is a point where we can begin to think about that. So, when it comes to gender, we can see that biological difference has a long history of being medicalized. Right, women's bodies were considered to be the pathological other. So on that count, you have a wide range of disabilities that are also similarly medicalized, as if they are the pathological other that we should not be, that we should not inhabit, and so on. So this whole history of biological difference moving to social constructionism is somewhat of a similar experience that disability has category also has. Then there's the matter of social exclusion, category of being Dalit or being Adivasi, merely having some kind of an accessible adaptation to a building is not going to be adequate enough. It requires a certain kind of a cognitive shift. It requires an emotional change and so on. So also, I think social exclusion of disabled people along various lines. Now, I'm not saying that all disabled people can be enabled if you have a building with better accessible infrastructure. There are going to be certain forms of social exclusion that will continue to be experienced. For instance, in the case of somebody who experiences mental distress and cannot share mental distress for fear of losing their job, right? That's not something that we openly share. We don't talk about it. We can't talk about it because you have this culture of ableism that circulates around that makes sure that you cannot talk about the kind of difference that you are. So then that's another way of thinking about various impairment categories intersecting with cultural differences and social differences. Affirmative action is another important area where I think there are overlaps. There are also departures in the way that you have affirmative action policies that are developed, and the inclusion of people from those social groups in the development of these policies. Now, you heard Professor Aneja shared with you this slogan that comes from the disability movement, which is nothing about us without us, right? That you cannot make any kind of a policy without policy about disability without including people with disabilities in the making of that policy. Now, similarly, this kind of a question has come up in relation to other social groups, and the way in which we respond to that, the way in which it is articulated by activists is also very different. The idea of the umbrella category I've already gone over, but it's also something similar that happens in relation to those who are marginalized on the basis of caste or tribal identity, where you have a wide range of experiences of belonging to the so-called category of tribe, but they're all grouped under certain kinds of umbrella categories. Then the issue of statistical minority that we are probably most familiar with in the context of religious minorities as well as sexuality minorities is also something that continuously informs disability activism, because here are questions about, oh, there are hardly any disabled people in my campus, why should I make a policy about them? Right, so that entire question about how many people are actually there for us to make accommodations, for us to build accessible campuses, and so on, is a question that continuously informs disability. But one of the problems there is that the counting of disability never happens accurately enough, and that's something that we're all familiar with in relation to caste. Right, there's a reluctance to count caste. In the last few days, particularly, you'll see that the newspapers are full of op-ed pieces that are talking about what is the caste census. So here also there is that kind of parallel. Recently, the NFHS, body that collects data on a variety of social categories, has dropped the question on disability, right? So the surveyors are not going to collect information on the presence of disabled members in households and so on. There's a lot of discussion around this by disabled groups across the country, and there is a lot of anger being expressed about it. And then finally, of course, discrimination experiences that vary. They vary along the lines of humiliation, they vary along the lines of on the axis of employment, on the axis of education, and so on. So if we have classrooms that are primarily oriented towards oral methods of learning, then you can imagine that we're already working within an ableist space, right? We have in our very structure excluded a variety of people with different disabilities. So moving on from there, what do we think of disability studies? How do we do disability studies? First, it may be necessary to keep in mind that this is not an interventionist field, meaning that it's not a field that's going to offer certain kinds of corrections or propose certain rehabilitation methods. It's not a proxy for special education. This is an important a point to keep in mind, because then the way in which we teach this, or the way in which we research within this field will be informed by this. Professor Aneja has already said this, but I want to repeat it, that we'll have to think of it as a field of critical inquiry, right? And what is it that can be made possible through this line of critical inquiry? One is that it's primarily interdisciplinary. We'll have to engage with multiple disciplines while thinking through ableism, while thinking through this whole constructedness of disability. And most importantly, while we get into it as a field of critical inquiry, we'll have to change everything else about the systems that we are working in. That's what it will have to enable. And on this note, I wanted to compliment MIT University on holding this entire program online, because having an online platform also means enabling access, right? And it is a gift given to us by the pandemic, but then how we use it, how do we deploy it? What are the ways in which we engage with it in order to enable better access is a question that we will have to continually engage with. So if it's a field of critical inquiry, then that means that it's not enough to merely identify disabled characters in our literary texts, but also think about how we are accessing that text. Did we all read it from a book? Did you read it from a Kindle where you were able to expand the font size? Did you listen to it off of a free YouTube video or through the podcast apps that are available? Or did you read it on Braille? So the way in which we access texts then is also connected to what we are identifying about these texts and plots and characters and so on. So therefore, disability studies is a disability-centric approach to thinking about and examining social realities, right? It is an emancipatory academic venture, somewhat similar to Dalit studies, to women's studies, to sexuality studies, and so on. There is an ingrained project here to make things more accessible, to find newer ways of thinking about embodiment. That embodiment is not this standard human body that we've all been taught that we have to be like, but that there are complex ways in which we access the world. And that's what our texts capture. So from there, I want to share this quote from Tobin Siebers. Tobin Siebers is an important theorist within disability studies. And he says, disability studies does not treat disease or disability, hoping to cure or avoid them. Avoidance is a very strong reaction to disability. It studies the social meanings, symbols, and stigmas attached to disability identity and asks how they relate to enforced systems of exclusion and expression. just imagine that this faculty development program was happening in a building. All of us had to go to that physical space, but then it just happened to be an inaccessible building, or it happened to be a space that did not have a sign language interpreter. Now, of course, we're on Zoom. We can use closed captioning, and anyone who requires that kind of access is not going to feel left out of this FDP. But then I think that what I also want to concentrate on today is are these enforced systems of exclusion and expression that keep reproducing disability in newer and different ways. So disability then is an epistemic category. The experience of disability gives us access to certain kind of knowledge, right? My being blind is going to give me access to the world in certain ways that a sighted person does not have. So that's one very simplistic example through which we can think about this. So then what this field has to enable us to do is to contest the dominant discourses of medicine, psychiatry, and education. And you'll see that these three institutions also emerge as oppressive structures in a lot of narratives, in a lot of fiction that we see both in literature and cinema, right? And therefore, disability becomes a standpoint of knowledge. It's a location of knowledge. Okay, and then this slogan seems to return to all of our slides, which is nothing about us without us in all the fields. So that is policymaking, medical establishments, education, applied and theoretical research. What is the way in which disability becomes the point of departure when we are operating through all of this, so that you're enabling various kinds of physical, emotional, cognitive, and social environments, in a way that it's accessible to all. And that brings me to this whole idea of social model thinking. This was a point on which Professor Anija stopped yesterday, where the social model of disability, which is primarily a theoretical idea, says that those of us who live with disabilities are not disabled by the impairment that is in us, but by the social structures that disable us. So what are the circumstances in which we have to operate that will bring out our impairment in a way as if it is a problem? So then if we were to take this as a style of thinking, then it's telling us to change the system and not the individual, right? And there are very strong implications for education here. I'm harping on education because all of us, I imagine, are teachers, researchers of some kind gathered here. And this, and so the move then would be from segregated education, that is the special schools, to integrated and inclusive approaches. Now, this also means that we adapt our everyday classrooms, and classroom systems to be accessible in many different ways. What is the way of doing that? The way of doing that is to include disabled individuals within the classroom. It could be a student, it could be ourselves who temporarily acquire disabilities or live with disabilities but have never felt, what shall we say, brave enough to share about it. So can that become a talking point that enables access? Social model thinking will also then push us to think about terminology, that is the words that we use and the language that we use, and how that is very much invested in a certain kind of politics. So when someone says, yeah, that person is suffering with a disability, it is very clear, that you're taking a third person position, that that the speaker is not someone who lives with a disability, but chooses to only frame disability in terms of suffering, right? So, so then, how do we make language informed by disability experiences, right? And of course, we have the very excellent instances of everyday metaphors that are used, or such a lame excuse. Students are always giving lame excuses. This is a common statement that a lot of teachers use, and I think reflecting on that would be a way of deploying the social model in our academic lives. Another point that could be reflected on is the way in which we're constantly thinking of either curing an impairment or preventing its very existence. And this comes to the fore when we're thinking about termination of pregnancy debates, as well as the right to live. Who has the right to live, and who has the right to die? While both termination of pregnancy and the right to die have been thought of as questions of autonomy, that I have to be in a position where I can make this decision myself, and I should be making this decision myself. I think it's important to consider that there are environments that push us to make certain decisions, and environments that prevent us from making certain kinds of decisions. Are we choosing death over life because there is a non-acceptance, not merely in terms of emotional infrastructure of the family, of the loved ones, and so on, but also because care is not available. Government supported care facilities are not there. And then you end up relying on private agencies, which are extraordinarily expensive, unaffordable, and so on. So then that choice is determined by economic factors. The choice is determined by emotional factors as well, because if you are subsidizing care, that means that there is a higher reliance on people at home, right? You're forcing someone else to stay at home and care for you because something else cannot be afforded. So the social model thinking will allow us to reflect on these structures. Of course, exclusion of various types. But then we see that the social model thinking has informed law and policy as well. The UNCRPD definition, that's the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, definition says, persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers. So the emphasis on the interaction of the impairment with barriers is significant here. That is what the social model is discussing, that that there are structural barriers, that there are external barriers that disable us further. So various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So disability is not to be determined only on the basis of the presence of an impairment, but it needs to be determined in terms of the barriers that are disabling. Another idea that comes to us from the disability movements in the West is this notion of thinking about the able-bodied people, right? That is the non-disabled people as only temporarily able-bodied. That is that we could acquire disabilities very quickly, and therefore it makes no sense to say that, oh, there are hardly any disabled students, we don't need to have a policy on disability, which means that you're not thinking of yourself as a subject of disability as a disabled subject in the making in the future, and so on. So I'll quickly go over concepts that have been studied within disability studies and probably will allow certain kinds of insights for us to use while looking at literary texts. One is this whole idea of normalcy, or the norm is something that is constructed historically. It didn't always exist. I know that around the time of COVID, many people were saying to each other, yeah, this is the new normal, or here's the new normal, and so on. So what is this normalcy? I mean, what is the normal? What is normalcy? It's a problem within disability studies, right? So disability studies then is turning the gaze. It's looking at this whole structure that is made up of norms and is constituted in the form of normalcy. So I've just listed out a few ideas here, drawing on Leonard Davis and of course Michel Foucault, because of his extensive work on institutions, on the ways in which institutions have over long periods of time pathologized various kinds of bodies and minds, right? And so you'll see that this happens with the prison system, it happens with the asylum, it happens with the hospital, and various other structures that were put in place. And all of these structures and institutions found newer and newer ways of establishing normalcy, of fine-tuning what this normalcy is. So for Davis, normalcy is actually something that comes into play in about the 19th century, right? And then it's something that's put in play through a variety of knowledge systems. So there's medicine, law, and education. And of course, with industrialization, you also have employment that produces the idea of the able-bodied worker that continuously others the worker who cannot perform something, or classifies someone as the worker who cannot perform something. Now, where is this history of normalcy going to take us? It's going to take us also to the eugenics movement, right? And eugenics, which starts off as a science, which starts off as a technological intervention in science, which is going to improve lives for people. But then what you see is that eugenics puts in place several ways of discarding bodies, or of categorizing bodies as the other, right? So, and of course, the big example that we have is in the context of Nazi Germany, where the larger idea is for people to fit a certain kind of normal body type, otherwise you are discarded. Now, it's not going to be difficult for us to think of different kinds of eugenics strategies that continue to work in our everyday lives. And that's why I gave you the case of termination of pregnancy, because in the context of termination of pregnancy, what you have is the identification of various conditions that one is told their child should not have, or you need to rule out Down syndrome, you need to rule out this, you need to rule out that. Now, that means that the medico-industrial complex is also setting up this whole idea of what the able-bodied individual is, right? And yes, health is important, but then is the idea of health also enforcing the idea that disabled people should not live? Right? So it requires a certain kind of critical thinking going forward. So eugenics has been involved in purifying populations in terms of race, controlling populations, right? And it was very interesting during the COVID-19 pandemic to think about the many ways in which there was a biopolitical control of populations. And I think one of the most startling cases was that of these, to use a term from the previous lecture, subaltern workers, the workers from the urban cities, that's the manual laborers and the gig economy workers and so on, who felt pressure to leave the urban spots to return to their villages and towns. But there you saw that the villages and towns were unwilling to accept people from the big cities because COVID was actually rapidly spreading in the big cities, right? So there has been this kind of a biopolitical control that's also continuously producing notions of able-bodiedness, disablement, and so on. Let's take our own context of academia, where we're finding newer and newer ways of standardizing intelligence, where we're finding newer and newer norms that we have to meet in order to become, a higher level of the profession, in order to reach a higher level of the profession. All of these then are also producing categories of able-mindedness, saneism, and so on. So on that note, let me go over ableism. I think I have about 7 minutes left. What is ableism? It's the discrimination and social prejudice against disabled people. I mean, that's the more obvious idea that it conveys. But primarily, ableism is a discrimination that favors able-bodied people, right? That creates spaces that only certain people can occupy, and then valorizes such people or valorizes certain kinds of abilities. So, then ableism is a type of discrimination in which able-bodied individuals are viewed as normal and superior to those with a disability, resulting in prejudice towards the latter. The modern concept of ableism emerged in the 60s and 70s when disability activists placed disability in a political context. I'm deliberately drawing this definition from something as common as Britannica.com to say that this idea of disability as an epistemic category is in operation, and that this, so it requires that we think of the world through these lenses. Within disability studies, there's Fiona Kumari Campbell, who's a very significant theorist who works on this idea of ableism, where she looks at ableism as being very deep-rooted, right? That it's entrenched into our systems. We don't even reflect on it. It would take too much effort for us to begin to think, oh, you're saying this is ableist when I do this. Right. One instance I've already given you is this oral form of education that our classrooms, rely entirely on that, foster it, right, and the exam system. So what I have here is a very long list of things that that would constitute a larger picture of ableism, and the way in which ableism unconsciously works in several different ways. So facial beauty standards, body shaming, behavior, gender standards, where you're expected to fulfill certain norms. Homophobia and transphobia are also types of ableism. Racism, casteism, because casteism is full of instances where spaces are made inaccessible. I mean, if we were to reframe untouchability and think of it in terms of a disability studies discourse, then what you have happening there is spaces that are being made inaccessible, to bodies just because they're inherently marked as being the other. Right? Then region, ethnicity, nationality, we have any number of instances there. Now, to end by telling you how do we bring all of this to think about literary and cultural disability studies? How do we use it as a critical approach? How do we employ these as theoretical interventions? Here are a set of questions that would probably help us move in those directions. It's to think about the ways in which disability is deployed in literature, cinema, and other cultural texts. What is it doing? What is the blind character doing in a certain kind of text? Yes, they may not be the protagonist. Are they the villain? Are they occupying certain kinds of positions? And then how is this the plot of the story then favoring a certain notion of normalcy? Is it producing the idea of able-bodiedness? This is something that happens very ordinarily within the tragic, right? Within the classical Aristotelian notion of tragedy, where you have this narrative turn that occurs when there is an acquisition of disability. So you have Oedipus Rex and blindness, then you have King Lear and Lady Macbeth and madness. The acquisition of this disability is also that fall that occurs within the Aristotelian plot, right? So in what way is disability a catalyst for the narrative? Is it making the narrative go forward, or does it do something else to the narrative? At the intersections of various categories, I think we can also consider the way in which disabilities are gendered differently, right? So then you had the case of Dattani's Tara. Now you'll see that the physical disability, the orthopedic disability, is also informing masculinity, right? It's enabling a certain kind of a construction of a non-normative masculinity, let's say. So how does that work? Are physically disabled male bodies, biologically male bodies, feminized in certain way? Is a sexuality attached, and so on? In what ways do disability, gender, race, nationality, and class intersect? I had several examples. Is it okay if I take 5 more minutes to wrap up?
Sure, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Does the narrative refigure the ways in which we define the human body? For example, how is prosthesis or technology tied to the body, and how does this change the ways in which we relate to our environment? Another trope that you may find is that certain kinds of impairments are tied to certain emotional or cognitive ideas. So for instance, Tiresias's blindness is something that is considered to enable him to tell the truth, right? So what is this connection that is built between blindness and truth telling? To use Hemachandran Kara's idea, what kind of a cosmology of blindness is that creating within literary text when there is a tying together of truth telling to blindness, right? And so on with several other things. So there are two premises that we need to work with possibly. And here, of course, I'm drawing on our very traditional education in the Western texts that all of us in MA English Literature go through, or who've had that kind of training. Now, unlike several other marginality discourses, you're going to find that disability proliferates in literature. Any of the canonical texts are going to give you instances of disabled characters, but the burden on us as critics or as teachers is to think of what that disability is doing within that story, right? How is it being used, and so on. So yeah, this is Mitchell's idea of narrative prosthesis, which was also shared with you yesterday. That disability has been used throughout history as a crutch on which literary narratives can lean on for their representational power, disruptive potential, and social critique. Right. So, what is Mitchell saying here? He's saying that literature has actually relied on disability. Literature has leaned on different kinds of disabilities to enable the tragic, to enable the unreliable narrators, right? To enable this modernist narrative, because the modernist narrative is full of broken images, to take Eliot's phrase. It's full of fragmentation. So the idea of disability as broken, is something that's entrenched there. Then, of course, there is the metaphorical use for social ills, the presence of evil and weaknesses. These create and contribute to a discourse around bodily differences and their social meanings. If we had time, we could have a discussion around what are certain characters that you can think of that fit into various tropes. So if you take up the question of how disability works in literature, then you also get the opportunity to think of whether specific impairment categories are tied to certain kinds of aesthetic expressions within literature. Now, I've given you the thematic idea of truth and blindness being one pair. If you think of stuttering or stammering, you'll find that the aesthetic of humor has been historically used, or humor is facilitated through the positioning of stuttering and stammering. Similarly, you'll have a club foot that may have been used in a lot of characters to make them villainous, right? Or to assign this kind of symbolic evil to the materiality of that character. So also one-eyedness. This is something that one can think through. And then I think I'll stop here after discussing this, but we can talk more if we have the time for questions. What is the role that different impairment categories play within these various genres, within the history of literature itself? I've given you the case of broken images, fragmentation, this disturbed mind that's very central to, let's say, a British and American modernism. But then you also have disability as that turn in the plot, right, which is very necessary for tragedy. And in romantic poetry, or in romanticism itself, there's a kind of, if we can call it, a strange reclaiming of disability conditions, right? There's Keats's tuberculosis that is romanticized. There is this chronic illness that he's experiencing, which also becomes the reason for him to listen to this beautiful nightingale, to write about that Grecian urn, to write various kinds of odes and so on. And of course, to end with the horror and Gothic, right? Monstrous figures and the way in which disability embodiment is used as a kind of signifier to enable the Gothic plot to move on. Thank you. I'm going to stop here, and we can probably take up questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. I guess the research scholars, those who are willing to pursue research, have got lots of ideas regarding their research in disability studies. Your slides have been wonderful ways to, let them know about what they can do in disability studies. We'll take a few questions, ma'am. The first question here is by Ms. Disha Mandal, and she asks about about the blindness in Oedipus, because at the end of the play, the protagonist makes him blind. So, like, is disability here a kind of an escape to escape the shape? Or because Tiresias' blindness is empowering him, but what should we talk about? How should we view, Oedipus's blindness?
Yeah, I mean, it can work differently in different texts, right? And even within the plot of the tragic, what is the positioning of this impairment? If it's a release, and I forgot to talk about how it is usually disability experiences within these texts that are used for catharsis, right? That catharsis is enabled by the presentation of various kinds of disabilities in different ways. So yes, surely one can go all out in thinking about Oedipus's blindness as also offering a certain kind of release and an escape.
The next question, ma'am, is by Mr. Shubhadeep Jana, and he asks, is it possible to study environmental and geographical disabilities? If yes, how?
Yeah, I don't know if you mean this, but then if one takes into consideration various geographical locations and also environments that cause impairments, right? For instance, the location of Bhopal, and there's a research scholar in my department who's working on Kasargod in Kerala, and how endosulfan, a poisoning of the environment, has led to the birth of several disabled children. But there is also the question of political conflict, isn't it? And this is something that Jasbir Puar writes about, where she looks at how disabilities are acquired in context of social and political conflict as well, where you have pellet gun injuries, you have spinal cord injuries, you have distress that is acquired by virtue of belonging in a conflict context. So then those are also significant research areas within disability studies. Jasbir Puar is probably one person you might want to read up on.
Ma'am, the next question is that says by Rekha Garg ma'am, and she asks, how do you see disability in Indian culture and literature?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not comfortable making this very neat category of something called Indian culture and literature. I think there are too many influences across India. Several of them are colonial. So where does colonial end and where does Indian begin is another question, I suppose, that can be taken up within disability post-colonial studies. But you had several instances that Professor Aneja had shared yesterday. But I think the interesting work that has happened is to think about various tropes of disabilities that emerge within texts in the Indian context. And one that we could think about is this disability acquired through punishment, or disability that is acquired by virtue of punishment. And I was thinking of Shurpanaka, in fact, to just connect us back to the previous lecture, where there is an amputation, where there is facial disfigurement that is experienced. And that facial disfigurement is supposed to also communicate a certain kind of or leads to the punishment, but humiliation, right? The punishment is because of the humiliation that one experiences. So there is a very deliberate social excluding that is the final result of this maiming that is going on there.
Right. So next we will move on to Dr. Pratyush, who has a question. So he'll ask you directly.
Okay.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Shilpa. It was a very intuitive and penetrative discussion, and it was a pleasure to hear you. So I have, ma'am, just two scrutinization on the particular topic. The first one is, ma'am, what is the difference between impairment and disability?
Do you want me to answer that before I go to your next one?
Yes, and my second scrutinization is that, ma'am, if disability is an inherent inborn condition, disability as a condition, how would we contribute, how literary studies contribute to the inclusiveness of the disabled people? How do we contribute to that? I mean, how does
Okay.
literary studies
Okay.
contribute to the inclusion of them, not the exclusion of them, since we're talking about the inclusion
Okay.
of the disabled people in disability
All
studies.
right.
Yes.
Okay. To answer your first question, now this whole theory of the social model is something that also proposes that impairment is that which is present within the body or the mind. So that bodily difference or the cognitive difference. Let's say the loss of an arm, right? The loss of an arm then is impairment. When you don't invite me to a party because I have only one arm, or if you don't allow me to use a scribe during the exam, then you're converting that impairment into a disability, right? That's a terminological distinction that is proposed by disability studies scholars who have worked on the social model. That is one. Second one, I think your second question is very interesting. Because what literature and maybe cinema as well enable is actually access to these first person narratives, right? So you have access to thinking about disability as an epistemic category. You have the creation of narrative voices by a lot of writers, that are deliberately disabled in some sense. In Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man, you have Lenny, who's at the center of the entire novel. She's someone with polio, but many people who read Ice Candy Man don't know that Bapsi Sidhwa herself has polio, right? So it's a way in which disabled writers may prefer to present or think through their disability experiences by characterizing someone there. So also Manto Stobatek Singh. Manto himself had the experience of living in an asylum. When he's giving us Bishan Singh in the short story, there is also that autobiographical experience that is being presented in the form of fiction. So I think that fiction gives us access to certain narratives that don't circulate in our social everyday lives, which gives us very special access then to thinking about how inclusion should work, right? What is the special knowledge of having disability that would enable creating a world that is not exclusive?
Yes, ma'am. So can we say, if I am not wrong, we can say that fiction and literature is normalizing the disability in a way. It is a medium of normalizing the disability, if I'm not wrong, ma'am.
I don't know if I can go that far yet. There are newer and newer texts and collections where you have the works only of disabled writers. Right. I think those texts then, this is also something Professor Aneja spoke about disability life writing, right, where there's no longer the need to be like a Bapsi Sidhwa or a Manto who cannot speak about their disabilities directly, but can only present them through their characters. It's possible now to,
Okay.
move in that
Thank you,
direction.
ma'am. My questions are rightly addressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ma'am, we'll take the next question. It is by Shraddha Gindlani, and she asks, it's a very interesting one. How can we relate disability and silenced voices of women around the world?
Right. I mean, there is a long discussion of this within the category of theory called feminist disability studies, where they primarily look at the way in which there is a certain kind of exclusion that is operating even when one is physically present. right? So physically one is included, but then there is an exclusion in terms of agency. So there's a lot of work that looks at how biological difference, particularly emotional difference, right? And I think that the case of Charlotte Perkins-Gilman's yellow
The
wallpaper,
yellow one.
one brings forward this intersectional identity of a disabled woman. But then the narrative does something really significant, which is it exposes the oppression. It exposes the structures that she has to live within, not only in terms of patriarchy, but also in terms of psychiatry. So you have a certain kind of critique there, once again operating through fiction when one cannot openly write about having a psychosocial disability and so on. So there's a lot of overlap. There's also intersectionality.
Yes. So, ma'am, I guess your answer is also the answer to Mr. Satish Morey's question regarding the impairment of mind and heart. So, as you said, that there's a lot of overlap. So, I guess his answer is also being, addressed by you. The problem is addressed by you. So, we'll just move on to Mr. Vicky Prasad, who also has a question for you.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture, and it's also enlightening and insightful one. So my questions, ma'am, actually, it's like beginning from the cartoon characters. When we have seen in the serialized reality shows, when there are cartoon characters having one eye. Okay, you see the long nose, such kind of things. So so this kind of strategy of making cartoon characters in the TV serials, are we going to empathize the viewers and the audience? The first one. Okay. As we have seen, Foucault is saying that someone becomes subaltern when someone lacks the agency of power. That lacking agency and lacking power. All right. So portraying characters in literature, both in literature and film, okay, those who are having the disabled body, okay, and those who are facing this kind of disabled any kind of impairment. So are we going to empathize through these mediums, both from literature and film, to the audience, those who are disabled? What kind of politics is there behind that, ma'am? What kind of politics is there?
I don't think that there is a single answer to that question, right? I mean, every text is likely to be doing different kinds of things in relation to the story that is being plotted. If you're speaking about Pinocchio and the long nose, there we see that this embodiment of the long nose is also tied into questions of morality, tied into issues. I mean, it's actually a cautionary tale, right? Don't lie. If you lie, your nose will grow long. But then what is implied there is that you should not have a long nose, that having a long nose itself is a problem, right? And I think that's what Professor Aneja meant when he said that use a disability lens to look at the text. What will this mean? This will mean that we think about embodiment and the shaping of cognition and the shaping of emotions that is constantly going on through a variety of structures. So thanks for your question, but I think that that we'll have to analyze that in relation to each text. See, now there's a very important disability studies disability activist, and her name is Alice Wong. Now, recently, she uses social media a lot. She said that one of the cartoon characters has been modeled on her and her disability activism. She's someone who has to use a pipe for breathing, and has various intersecting chronic illness conditions. But now there is a cartoon character modeled on her. Obviously not to make fun of her, but then to impart the whole idea of disability activism as well. So I think it will mean, there are too many meanings that can be made, but they'll have to be studied contextually.
Ma'am, can we include the dehumanized grotesque characters as we have seen in the case of Gregor Samsa in Metamorphosis? All right, when he's lacking the power, he's become disabled after after one night. It's a troublesome night, and he becomes a vermin that Gregor Shams and he becomes disabled. So that grotesque and dehumanized characters, as we have also seen in the a rhinoceros, that animal-esque and grotesque. Can we club them into the category of disabled bodies?
Yeah, but I started out saying that this is not a fixed category, right? It's up to you to think about what are the ways in which disability theory can be used to analyze characters. Of course, but then the more interesting question would be to think about the relationship between disablement and existentialism. Why is metamorphosis the text in which this kind of a disability is being used? What is it doing to conveying the idea of existentialism? So there is a tying up of an ideology along with that kind of embodiment. So I think those questions are more interesting than taking these characters out of context and looking at them as either good or bad.
Thank you,
Very
ma'am. Thank
right,
you very
ma'am.
much.
Very right, ma'am. So I guess there are no more questions, ma'am. Thank you so much for addressing patiently all our questions and queries. And we had a very good time listening to your take on the disability studies. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you. It was very nice to meet you all virtually.
Same here, ma'am. Thank you so much. May I now introduce the third speaker of today, Dr. Khairunisa Nakathorji. Dr. Khairunisa teaches at the Department of English at Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Hyderabad. She holds a PhD in English literature from the English and Foreign Languages University, FLU, Hyderabad, in which she explored the representation of incest in Indian narratives through a study of contemporary Indian plays. Her research interests include gender studies, contemporary Indian drama, post-colonial literature, and blue humanities. Her work examines gender, kinship, sexuality, and taboo. Additionally, she has collaborated with the director of distance education, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, as the contributor and editor for undergraduate and postgraduate textbooks. Currently, she is co-editing a book on feminism and English literary studies in India titled Recasting Gender Feminism and English Studies in India, which is to be published by Routledge, and there are many other written works by her. May I now invite Khairunisa ma'am to speak on blue humanities and gender. Please, ma'am.
Thank you. Hello, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Am I audible enough?
Yes, ma'am, you are on.
Okay. First, good afternoon to all of you. And I thank Moiminul Islam, the coordinator of the FDP and the School of Languages, Amity University, for extending your invitation to me. The title of my talk, first let me share. The title of my talk is Blue Humanities and Gender. And I hope what I talk today will be of some use to you. Blue Humanities is an interdisciplinary field that uncovers fascinating connections between literature, environmental studies, culture studies, gender, and the ocean. Why is it vital, you may ask, to grasp the essence of Blue Humanities? This interdisciplinary approach helps us to move beyond the confines of traditional academic boundaries. We gain a fresh perspective on how literature, culture, and the vast expanse of the ocean intertwines, enriching our understanding of human experiences. More than 55% of human body is made up of water. About 71% of Earth's surface is water covered. And the oceans hold about 96.5% of all Earth's water. Only 29% consist of continents and islands, yet our thinking is more often than not land-centric. which of course is understandable as we live on land and not on or in water. However, we are made of water, we are sustained by water, and water is crucial to our existence. In spite of that, water only lies in the peripheries of our thinking and imagination until and unless our bodies call attention to it. Say, for example, when we are very thirsty and can think of nothing else but a glass of water, or when water calls attention to itself in drastic ways, for instance, a flood or tsunami, we don't usually think of it. What Blue Humanities does is it calls our attention to the fact that water is indispensable and helps us see and understand the ways in which human beings and cultures engage with water. In a sense, it is a water-centric approach in the understanding of the world we live in. I just want to know if any of you live near water bodies, be it sea, river, lake, anything. Is there anyone who is in close contact with
I'm living nearby Ganga River.
Ganga River? So what is your experience of it? Others can also either, you can write in chat and
My experience is like, yeah, there is a water. We go and fishing and come with fishing. That's it.
okay. Okay, anyone else? Is
I
there
guess, ma'am, the air must be cooler over there.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
must be
Yes.
pleasant, it must be cooler.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
But, from climate to climate, it can change.
Yes.
Sometimes it can be very humid. I just wanted to know how many of you have this experience of swimming. Water can have a different sense, right? Even if you take a shower, there is a way that we feel the touch of water. It's different when you immerse yourself in water. It is difficult when you go for diving, right? When you go for deep water diving, the experience of water is very different. But however, we do not make water center of our thinking and imagination. Often, as I earlier said, it is in the peripheries, it is in the backdrop. Even in literature, mostly it is in the backdrop. In some works you will find that it is foregrounded, and that is what the Blue Humanities challenges. It forces us to think through water, the importance of water. And in Anthropocene, we cannot not think of water because water has been commodified. It has been, big companies decide who can have access to water, who cannot have access to water, and so on. So water is very crucial, right? So Blue Humanities brings together different academic disciplines. So one of the things that is very important in Blue Humanities is that it is an interdisciplinary study, interdisciplinary field. It brings together academic disciplines like literature, cultural studies, environmental studies, history, etc., and to shed light on the complex relationship between the ocean and us humans. It recognizes that the ocean is not just a big body of water, but a space that holds immense cultural, historical, and even literary significance. It studies literature, art, folklore, and other cultural productions to understand how writers and artists have engaged with the marine world, to see how they have portrayed the ocean's significance in their works, whether it is as a source of inspiration, a site of adventure, or even a metaphorical space for deep reflection and contemplation. It also investigates how different cultures perceive and interact with the ocean. Of course, here I keep saying ocean, but it also extends to other water bodies. My work is basically with sea and ocean. That is why it naturally comes like that. But it could be a river, it could be a stream, creek, anything. It looks into the rituals, traditions, and practices of coastal communities and how they are intertwined with the oceanic environment. It is through these explorations that we can unravel the complex ways in which gender roles, power dynamics, and social hierarchies intersect with oceans and other water bodies. Blue Humanities is a relevant field of study and is of ecological significance as it investigates the impact of human activities on marine ecosystems and the larger environmental systems. It engages with crucial issues of pollution, climate change, overfishing, habitat destruction that threaten the health of our oceans. By using tools from environmental studies and eco-criticism, we can gain critical insights into the environmental crisis facing our oceans and find ways to ensure the long-term sustainability. Blue Humanities fosters a spirit of collaboration and dialogue with other disciplines. By breaking down the barriers between disciplines, the Blue Humanities encourages us to generate new knowledge and innovative approaches to understanding the ocean's cultural, environmental, and gender dimensions. The emergence of Blue Humanities marks a transformative shift in our academic pursuits. As an interdisciplinary field, it recognizes the need to move away from siloed approaches and embrace a holistic understanding of the ocean. Scholars from various disciplines, including literature, cultural studies, environmental studies, eco-criticism, history, and anthropology, have come together to explore diverse ways in which the ocean shapes and is shaped by human cultures. Blue Humanities, like most of the recent critical theories, do not have a methodology of its own, but is a very eclectic methodology. It takes from various other fields, and I've already told you that it is very interdisciplinary. Eco-criticism is vital in the study of Blue Humanities. Eco-criticism serves as a critical framework within Blue Humanities, enabling scholars to examine the representation of oceanic environment in literature and other cultural forms. By analyzing how literary works depict the ocean, eco-criticism provides insights into the cultural, ecological, and social implications of our interactions with the sea. This approach sheds light on the complex relationship between human imagination, cultural production, and the ocean, deepening our understanding of its significance. Cultural studies and environmental studies play vital roles in Blue Humanities, offering distinct yet interconnected perspectives. Cultural studies allow us to explore the diverse ways in which the ocean shapes cultural practices, belief systems, artistic expressions, and collective memory. By investigating narratives, symbols, rituals, and material practices associated with the ocean, we gain insight into its profound influence on human cultures throughout history across geographical contexts. Environmental studies, on the other hand, enables us to understand the ecological impact of human activities on the ocean. This includes examining issues such as pollution, overfishing, climate change, and the need for sustainable practices. By studying the relationship between human societies and marine environment, environmental studies provide critical insights into the urgency of environmental stewardship and the need to address ecological challenges. Intersectionality as a theoretical framework is crucial within Blue Humanities. It helps us to understand how different social identities intersect and mutually shape experiences and power dynamics. In the context of gender and the ocean, intersectionality helps us critically analyze how gender is both influenced by and influences our engagement with maritime environment. By examining the diverse narratives, representations, and embodied experiences of gender within oceanic contexts, we gain a more nuanced understanding of the gender dimensions of human-ocean relationship. Intersectionality also allows us to investigate power dynamics, environmental justice issues, the lived experiences of marginalized communities in relation to the ocean. By recognizing intersectionality of gender with social identities such as race, class, caste, sexuality, Blue Humanities foster a comprehensive analysis of diverse ways in which individuals experience and shape the oceanic environment. By examining how different groups of individuals experience and navigate oceanic environment based on their own social locations, we uncover a deeper understanding of the complex interactions between gender, culture, and the ocean. By adopting an interdisciplinary approach and engaging with other disciplines such as eco-criticism, cultural and environmental studies, intersectionality scholars within Blue Humanities deepen our understanding of cultural, environmental, and social significance of the oceans. Now, if I bring your attention to some of the current critical work on blue humanity, Steve Menz have contributed immensely to this study of blue humanities. In fact, he's the one who coined the term blue humanities. His book, Shipwreck Modernity, Ecologies of Globalization, 1550 to 1519, in that he explored the narratives of shipwrecks and shows how, ocean brings history, anthropology, everything together in the understanding of ocean and the culture, that are connected to it. One of his another book, which is very vital in the field of blue humanities, is called An Introduction to Blue Humanities. Steve Menz is also someone who had written widely on Shakespeare, analyzing works like Tempest and so on. He has written on that. So he's someone who connects literary narratives with, environmental studies and eco-criticism to bring it together. Hester Blum, her book published in 2015, called The View from the Masthead, Maritime Imagination and Antebellum American Sea Narratives, in that she explores the narratives on maritime narratives. She also analyzes in that, canonical texts such as Melville's Moby Dick, and then Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, and so on. And it shows how, navigation, maritime narratives have influenced our thought and our thinking and our imagination about sea and oceans. Margaret Cohen's The Novel and the Sea, in which she demonstrates how the ocean becomes a metaphorical space that reflects human desires, fears, and societal transformation. So she analyzes Walter Benjamin and other people. She has other works as well. One of, again, an important work is Profane Illuminations, in which she talks about Walter Benjamin and so on. Then you have Stacey Alemo. There's few people this I am bringing your attention to. Astrida Neymanis is again someone whose work I like. Bodies of Water, Post-Human Feminist Phenomenology. This is a seminal work in what is now understood as hydrofeminism. How we engage with water bodies is also very gendered, and how fluid it is. That is what her works focuses mostly on. So I would like to now talk about gender and how gendered the water bodies or our experience or the ways that we interact with these are. All of us, I think, would agree that gender is a social construct, right? You find that even if you look into the earlier narratives, you find that going back to the colonial voyages, it was often a men's affair, isn't it? It was men who were going at these explorations of, let's say, El Dorado or colonies and so on. And initially it was their account. Even if women figures in those accounts, they do not seem to have any agency within the narratives. They were either transported as slaves, or they were spouses of officers who were traveling to various colonies and so on. So a gendered way of how we relate with the sea, especially the communities who live closely with sea and other water bodies, is very significant in the study of blue humanities. Gender analysis holds significant importance within blue humanities, providing a critical lens through which we can understand the complex interplay between gender, culture, literature, and the ocean. By examining the ways in which gender shapes and is shaped by our interactions with maritime realm, We gain deeper insights into the diverse experiences and power dynamics that influence human-ocean relationships. Gender as a social construct influences our understanding of the ocean and finds manifestation in both literature and lived experience. Within the blue humanities, scholars interrogate how gender norms, roles, and identities shape cultural practices, environmental policies, and narratives related to the ocean. By recognizing the socially constructed nature of gender, we can unpack its influence on our perceptions, interactions, and representations of the marine world. So my work is located mostly on this small island, which is part of the one of the smallest union territory of Lakshadweep, right? So the southernmost island is called Minicoy. That is an anglicized term. The local community referred to it by Maliku. And it is interesting to look at this island is because it has close connections. I'm not talking about the entire archipelago of Lakshadweep. I'm referring to the southernmost island. Interestingly, it was earlier part of Maldives Islands. If you look into the map, so you have the Minicoy or Maliku as the southernmost island. Then you have the, the northernmost Maldivian island very close to it, right? Now, historically, Minicoy has been, or Maliku had been part of Maldives, and it is only in 1956 that through plebiscite, it joined what you call the Indian Union Territory of Lakshadweep. For a while, it was under the Travancore rule and so on. So this particular island is in Marco Polo's diaries referred as a woman's island. It is one of the, and that name has stuck with the island because most of the men of the island work in merchant navy, and it seems to there seems to be an increasing interest in maritime employment, because even now the what you call youngsters who come out, they either prefer engineering and other courses, and then they would eventually end up doing marine course and join ships. So that the relationship with sea, not just as a lived experience but as an employment, seems to be sustained even now. You could find, and it is a matrilineal community, probably because of the influence of Kerala to an extent. All the islands are actually matrilineal, but I'm particularly talking about Minicoy, which the matrilineal culture to which might have come from Maldives, right? So here, if you look into this particular island, it is divided into 10 sections, which most of the writers who are not from the community refer to it as villages, but local communities refer to it as Avaru. So Avaru cannot actually be, I'm not very sure that it can be translated as a village or not, but these are these sections, and there is a community way of life that you still get to see there. And you find that women play a key role, because men, of course, there are people employed now. Things are changing. Most of the people are in, government sector jobs and so on. But largely, especially in Minicoy, you find that most of the men are away at sea, either as officers in officers or crews in, foreign going merchant navy ships, or they are employed in local ships that run from, either Bepur to Lakshadweep, or from Cochin to Lakshadweep, and Mangalore to Lakshadweep, and so on. You would at any given point see more women than men in the island. And if you look into the local governing bodies, like I told you that it was divided into 10 atturis, and each atturi would have a community's house, and then there would be one wouldn't call it a leader perhaps, because they refer to it as a Bodukaka, which would mean elder brother. And then you would have, Bodudata, which is an elder sister. So you find that in local government bodies such as that, because those are the people who would be taking care of everything related to their own atiri. So, for example, because there are at least 99% of them are Muslims. So you would find celebrations such as Eid. On the day of Eid, you would find that it's community cooking that happens. Everything is prepared in that community house and so on. So throughout, if you look into that particular culture, you find that the way that women engage with the what do you call things related to water, because they're surrounded by water. It's very small island, perhaps less than between 7 to 11 kilometers, so on. And if you go by the width, hardly, you can cover the entire island. You can walk entire island in one day. So you find that the women, everyone is literate there and can read their own language. The script is that of Divehi. Divehi, for example, Maldives again is a what you call colonial term, anglicized term. The natives of Maldives call themselves as Divehi Raje, right? So Divehi is the language that they speak. So Mahal is the language that the people of Maliku speak, which is a dialect, but it has then, after it has joined the Union Territory of Lakshadweep, so the language itself has changed a lot, but still you find that the northern, it is still very similar to the language spoken in the long northern islands of Maldives. So here, as I told you, that it's a matrilineal society. The children do not take father's surname, they take mother's surname. Property goes from, mostly from women and so on. Yes, so what I was trying to say is that when let us say, fishing, when men go out fishing, but once the fish arrives at the shore, it is this woman who actually take charge of it, which I later talk about when I talk about the folk literature. So I'm not going to elaborate it on right now. So I'll just move forward. So another concept, as I told you, that intersectionality as framework, right? An intersectional approach is crucial for examining gender within Blue humanities. Intersectionality acknowledges that gender intersects with other social identities such as race, class, caste, sexuality, and ability, creating unique experiences and power dynamics. By incorporating intersectional perspectives, we move beyond a monolithic understanding of gender and recognize the diversity of experiences and inequalities within oceanic contexts. This framework allows us to explore how different individuals and communities navigate and contribute to the ocean, highlighting the importance of inclusivity and social justice in our study of maritime realm. When we talk about these communities who live very close to water, probably you all must have observed near your own places, if you are living near what you call water bodies, with the increase in tourism, especially if you look into Caribbean islands, for example. So the beaches are often now local communities do not have any access to the beaches. Same with the is the case of Maldives, especially the islands where tourism has exponentially increased in those islands, what happens is that so the beach, the part next to the, the closest to the sea, that part do not usually belong to anyone. But what happens is that when big corporations buy the land adjacent to the beach, part of the beach, so they limit the access of local communities. So if you have to access the beach and the sea in front of the resort, for example, then you have to go via the resort. So going via the resort would mean that you pay, isn't it? So, and these beaches are very vital for the local communities, right? That is where they gather, that is where they receive the boats and so on. That's a place of entertainment. That's a place of social gathering. That's a place where children play, old people, rest and so on. But then we see that in most places where the big corporations are taking on tourism, it limits the access of local community, which I think is something that we should all worry about, because the land to it belongs, the people are not able to actually access it. Within the blue humanities, we can analyze gender representation in various literary works and cultural artifacts to better understand the complexities of gender dynamics in relation to the ocean. By examining how gender is depicted in literature, art, and popular culture, we uncover narrative symbols and tropes that shape our understanding of the ocean and its significance. Literature has long been a powerful tool for exploring gender dynamics, and the ocean has often served as a backdrop for these explorations. From classic novels to contemporary works, literature allows us to dive into the depths of gender representation and examine how it intersects with the maritime environment. Literature abounds with multiple examples of man's encounter with the sea. I use the term man's deliberately, as they are the ones who manned the boats and ships. One couldn't help but think of notable canonical examples such as Melville's Moby Dick or Hemingway's Old Man at the Sea, etc., due to the enduring impact it had in literature. I'm sure that your own regional works would reflect, the water bodies that are near you. For example, if you take the literature from Kashmir, there is hardly any work which does not talk about water bodies. But even if you look from an ecological perspective, Kashmir had a lot of water bodies than now. And because of the large scale construction that is happening, without, like anywhere else, without much thought about ecological concerns. So the water bodies are being filled and so on. As a result, you find, floods and things happen. Nevertheless, if you look into the literature ranging from, Aga Shayatari or Lal Ded, you will find, mention of Dal Lake or other water bodies. And I'm sure that in your regional works, you also must have, the water bodies that are near you. Can anyone does anything come to your mind right now? Think of the water bodies that are near you and the literature from the region. No?
Ma'am, maybe they are unable to speak, so they will write in the chat.
Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, okay, then I probably wouldn't wait and go on. But if you have something to say, please write down. Yeah.
There are answers, ma'am.
Okay, I'll have a look.
And like one participant is says that it's a Bangla text, ma'am, by Mrs. Shubhadeep Janai, says Titas Ekti Nodir Nam. And then Dr. Shruti writes about the Tavamasi. And one participant says that he is from say like Kashmir. And the translation of the Bangla is a river called Titas in English. The translation is there. By Dhruv Bhatt, Tatvamasi is there. So Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Tide.
And someone has written about Jhelum as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There are
yeah,
many texts that they are recollecting over here.
yeah, it's good to see them participating. Someone
Yes.
had said that, someone lives near the relatives live near the river in Nadia district, right? While the
Right.
river provides life, but during monsoon, they feel very scared. Flood might hit.
Yes.
That is like any other natural event, right? It's not specific just to water bodies. I understand some of my relatives also, I mean, my spouse's relatives live near uh, what do you call it, a river in Kashmir, and when it floods their house. There is always this fear of flooding, but nonetheless, they refuse to move away from that. They refuse to construct the house elsewhere because they love the river. So it is, even though it is something that is fearful perhaps in monsoon, but still there seems to have some kind of emotional connect with uh, that. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Where is yeah. Yeah. So I would quickly come to the literature that I'm actually engaging with. My interest is actually in the literature from Maldives and Lakshadweep. When I say Lakshadweep, I'm talking about this particular island, of course, Maliku. So one of the notable works in Maldivian folk tales in English had been by Xavier Romero Fras, and it is called Folk Tales of the Maldives, which was published in 2012. And the book has 80 Maldivian folktales. Imagine he had managed to collect 80 Maldivian folktales, which is no mean task. Anyone who is engaged in collecting folktales would know that it's very difficult actually to get folktales. And the fact that he has collected 80, I'm very impressed by it. And this work is based on the research that he has done for over 3 decades. I mean, close to 3 decades, where he had stayed there, gone there multiple times, stayed with them, and produced this wonderful book. And some people in Maldives say that probably Romero Ferraz knows about Maldives than more Maldivians today. Nevertheless, in his preface to the book, he says that he has not been able to find any folk tales from Maliku, which is Minicoy, and concludes that there are perhaps no folk tales in Maliku, which I actually do not agree with, because in my last visit to the island, I was able to manage to collect, in a very short visit to the island, I had managed to collect at least 10 folk tales, and I'm sure that there are much more to be explored there. And because of their close social, historical, cultural, and linguistic connect, you find a lot of similarities between Maldivian folktales and the Maliku folktales. So one of the interesting projects could be a comparative study of both the folktales from both these places. Some of the tales are, the structure is almost same with, certain changes of characters and endings and so on, but you could see a lot of similarities in that. In Maldivian and Minicoy folklores, you find the difference in the ways in which men and women engage with the sea. Women are often depicted as waiting for their beloved or spouse as they travel for business or trade, or waiting for the fishing boats to arrive with the day's catch. However, when the fishing boats arrive, one finds women taking charge. They clean, they cut, they process the fish. Women play a vital role in making the fish to a product that is a saleable commodity as dried fish, and in modern time as canned fish and pickle and so on. Men are often depicted as traveling for fishing, trade, and commerce, managing ships and boats. However, both genders are depicted in close contact with the sea and beaches, although in different ways. The folk tales abound with tales of birds, fish, and animals, which are part of the island's ecology. Additionally, other local art forms like Tavaru, which these are lyrical narratives and often about the life at sea. Now, you find Tavaru in Maldives as well as in Minicoy. Usually, it is more written in the form of an epic. You know, it is very lyrical. It's a long narrative form, and originally it has been oral. So it has also now been written down, but then it is very difficult to trace the writer, as you know, with oral forms. Since most of Tavaru is sung by women, one of the dominant themes one finds in it is about female's figure, often the mother telling the child about the father, about his love for the family and the gifts that he's going to bring when he comes back. Some of the notable works are Daturudiya Paigam. Daturudiya would mean, you know, the person who had traveled abroad. So Paigam would basically mean, a book or a narrative, Bolufil Paigang and Daruful Paigang and so on. I'm not going to spend much time on it now. So by analyzing these examples and others within Blue Humanities, we deepen our understanding of how gender is portrayed, negotiated, and contexted in relation to the ocean. These literary works serve as valuable touchstones, enriching our exploration of gender dynamics and opening avenues of critical dialogue and interpretation. The exploration of gender within Blue Humanities is of paramount importance. By recognizing gender as a social construct and examining its manifestation in literature and the ocean, we uncover diverse ways in which gender influences our understanding and engagement in marine realm. Through intersectional perspectives, we highlight the intersections of gender with other social identities, fostering inclusivity and acknowledging the multiplicity of experiences within oceanic contexts. Analyzing gender representation in selected examples, such as literary works, further illuminates the complex dynamics at play. By engaging in rigorous gender analysis within Blue Humanities, we deepen our understanding of the social, cultural, and environmental dimensions of human-ocean relationships and contribute to a more inclusive and comprehensive exploration of interdisciplinary field. And in the Anthropocene, issues related to water is crucial when water is commodified and capitalism decides who can have access and who cannot access. So we cannot but pay attention to the issues related to water, right? Even we have to perhaps even create new terminology when we say that territory, which comes from the word terra, which is land. So we cannot use such terms when we are talking about the sea. I would stop here, but before that, I have some pictures which probably would help you have an understanding of the island that I was talking about. Can I take some time, Maimuna?
Yes, ma'am, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the map of the Lakshadweep group of islands. So I think you can see Minicoy towards the end, right? So I had talked to you about Tavaru. So this is how Tavaru is sung by women there. On the right side, the photo is that of a competition perhaps held. 1 minute, sorry. Yeah. So the one at the right is, you can see that there are mics and stuff. So it's of a competition that was held in 2006. These photos I have got from FG Muhammad. He thankfully shared it with me. So women sitting there and what you call singing. And often you see that in, I had told you about Avaru, and in Avaru, you have this dress code. So in Avaru, for every peer group of, let us say, people who are from 60s to 65, roughly, I mean, it's not age-centric, but you have them forming groups, and they would often on functions wear, clothes which are almost like a uniform. So this is Beru. This Beru is a form of dance. And in this, when they sing the Tavaru, Savaru is also sung by them. So this is the male version of it. So I was talking about the relationship of women and water bodies. So the choir making, it's not an industry, right? And this choir, the choir is not made for any particular household. I told that the way of living is a very community-driven way of living. So this is the people of One Navaru, which some people would translate as village, but I have my reservations regarding that. Anyway, so these are people of Navaru, starting from, how it is taken out of the pond and how it is beaten, and then, you find them readying it to be woven on the right. Yeah. And none of this is done for their own benefit. So no one gets the produce out of it. It goes to the community house, and the community house might sell it. And if anyone from the community wants, they will sell to them, and it goes outside as well as a product. But as an individual, you don't get any benefit. It goes to the community, and that fund is used for community events, right? So you have women doing that. You have on the right, the finished product, so to speak. So on the right, that place you see, it is an Avaruge. It is a community house. It does not belong to anyone in particular. So here you find again women weaving, palm leaves. Again, it is a community work. It's not done for any particular person. So you have beaches here, and I was talking about how women engages when the fish come to the sea. It is, divided. So each individual who has gone in the ship gets a certain number of fish. It is divided. After that, it is sold to anyone who wants from there. And what is left over is often sent to the canning factory. It is sold to the canning factory. And on the right, you see the canning factory, and it is mostly women work there in the processing and other things. Women work there. Unfortunately, with the current administrator, Praful Patel, most of this particular unit, which has been there for decades, it has now been closed, and all these workers have been rendered jobless because canning factory is in Minikoy only. So there are various other issues related to this, because suddenly people are being rendered unemployed, so here are, just to show how close the people live to the sea. Now, on the left, you see the ship, right? So in monsoon, the ship cannot come to the jetty, so you cannot directly board the ship. So you have to go in a boat, and the sea can be very rough, and you go there. And it is all done as a community work, embarking, disembarking to the ship. It even now continues like that. Of course, there are government employs some of these boats to ferry people. So here net fishing, again, due to ecological concerns, the nets, which are very smaller mesh kind holes, such nets are not allowed because it catches small bait, small fishes as well. So it's not allowed. And net fishing is not allowed within the lagoon. It is only allowed outside the lagoon, because overfishing is a concern, and often fishing boats from Sri Lanka and other places come and fish in what you call the Arabian Sea, the sea close to it, which again is a problem because it they don't think about the sustainable way of catching fish. What is encouraged in the islands, both by fisheries and other administrators, are pole and line fishing, and that is what also is traditionally used in fishing. Yeah. So as I've told you that everything is done in a very community sort of a way. I'm not sure whether you are able to see that, but between these jahadoni, which is a kind of a race boat, these boats are not used for fishing. These are just used for special occasions to ferry, let us say, an important guest, or when people go, on a day of festival. Nowadays, it is mostly used in boat races only, and in between you can see people holding drums, playing beru, and so on. It is called jahadoni, right? Jahadoni is this particular narrow boats, very decorative boats, and each avaru might use a different color. Yeah, that's all. I would stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really very, very interesting to know about Blue Humanities. And there are a few questions, ma'am, if you permit.
Yes.
Actually, yes. The first question is from Shubdeep Jana. And he asks, ma'am, can you please suggest a few books on hydro-humanities?
Hydro-humanities. Astrida Neyman's book I would suggest, because it deals with hydrofeminism, but also with hydro-humanities, which Astrida Neyman's book I had earlier shared in a slide. Just give me a minute. It is called Bodies of Water, Post-Human Feminist Phenomenology, right? Yeah.
The next question is from Dr.
Sorry, if any participant, I can give you a reading list. I can hand over to the coordinator. Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. We will hand it over to the participants. Ma'am, the next question is from Dr. Kenza Kurian, and she asks, can Blue Humanities come under the genre of postmodernism?
In fact, post-humanism, one would say. Because here we are not talking just about human. It is not human-centric. Blue Humanities, of course, engages with humans' interaction with the ocean, but also it is a much larger and a wider study. That's why I said it is very interdisciplinary. It looks into the impact on other forms, other life forms. So it's not. I would think of it as post-humanist than postmodern. Of course, it is postmodern as well. Yeah, I hope I answered that.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is from Mr. Vicky Prasad. He'll ask the question directly.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for this, very erudite and enlightening lecture, ma'am. My question is about the dichotomy of sea and land that we can notice in the stories and the novellas of Joseph Conrad. As you have mentioned, Lagoon, okay, we have the secret sharer, so Heart of Darkness. These novellas and short stories, not only in Joseph Conrad, we have many like literature, suppose Treasure Island, okay, R.L. Stevenson, we have. So in these novellas and novels, okay, across literatures, we have seen the dichotomy of sea and land. Do they overlap really? So if we have a separate like culture on land, okay, and can we have a separate culture on sea that Joseph Conrad is talking about?
Which culture?
A culture on in sea, a culture in sea. We have a culture in a land that is called lithosphere.
Okay.
So can we have culture in the hydrosphere? Okay, when.
Yeah, have you completed?
Yes, ma'am.
when we talk about land and sea, we have to also understand our physical limitations, isn't it? We can engage with the sea and so on, but we cannot live on it. We can live on it if you have, now you have resorts on sea, but those are very fancy things. The local communities do not live like that, and we all know that. It is for tourists for few days. It's probably not sustainable to do that. And researchers, people working in marine biology, they do not advocate that either. Now, one of the proposition that the government of Lakshadweep is trying to bring in, which is called LADR, land, what do you call it? Land acquisition rights or something. I'm sorry, I'm not able to now remember the acronym. So what they're trying to do is that they're trying to build water villas in these small islands. And ecologically, it's not sustainable. Even in Maldives, there are certain islands and there is a limit, there is a cap on how you can build. And those islands and Lakshadweep Islands, I'm talking from my own location of research. I hope that applies to what you're asking. So it cannot be blindly. So some more than 100, I think, researchers from different universities of India had signed, written and signed a letter and sent to the president asking to stop that because that might look very fancy and so on, but that does not, it is not sustainable. It damages the corals, the corals is the bed on which it is formed. Now, coming back to literary representation of what we're talking about Heart of Darkness and so on. Even if you look into that, you find that it is the engagement with the river. It's not, living in the river. Now in that he again draws, of course, you're probably aware of Achebe's criticism of it as well. Though the book was hailed as one of the great post-colonial book, but Achebe says that you still can find a lot of, colonial races in the language itself, especially the way that he talks about the river Thames using all kinds of positive adjectives, and then talking of the river Congo in very negative terms. But in the book, we do not find the river itself is mentioned, but that is the persona's perception of the river that is explored much in that particular text. You do not find the what you call the lived experiences of local communities given in that particular book. That itself, I think, can be offered as a what you call critique of the book. So even if you go inside the sea, now if there is someone among the audience who goes to deep diving, right? If anyone has gone into deep diving, scuba diving, for instance, even when you go to scuba diving, the instructor will tell you that after so much time, you have to come up, right? Because otherwise your body gathers too much of night, because you use nitrox to go inside. So you have to come up because there is a physical what you call limitations that we need to think of. So even the deepest of the scuba divers, they have to surface up and then shed that and then probably going. So those concerns, yeah, are there? Someone is, yeah. Did I answer?
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Ma'am, the next question is from Mr. Bimaljit Singh, and on similar lines, the question is, it says, ma'am, I wonder why we have coined the term hydrofeminism and not hydrobiology, since water is an integral part for all forms of life on Earth. And ma'am, shouldn't we address our planet as water rather than Earth, since more than 70% is water than land?
Yes. Now, why it is called hydrofeminism and not hydrobiology? Because in hydrofeminism, they are concentrating on certain gendered way of engaging with water, as a gendered way, right? So in feminism itself, people ask, why do we need feminism? We have humanism and so on. But if you look into the society around you, we know that, gender is very real, and feminism, probably now many of the people think of feminism as an F word, but I think feminism has done so much in to the women and even transgender women and so on. So each one relates to water in different ways. How men and women historically, professionally, isn't it? Even the examples that I have given of the communities, the engagement is very different. Yes.
And ma'am, we have the next very interesting question from Dr. Shruti Dodia. And she asks, I would like to ask whether we can find any connections between motherhood and ocean. As I've observed in many narratives like The Lost Daughters, What We Wanted, and the iconic scene of Roma on the beach, how ocean engages with these mothers and shapes their beings. So is there a connection between motherhood and ocean?
Yes, there is actually, in most of the literature, what you would find, there are like categories, if you can, the themes. One is of all giving. Sea is considered as all giving. It gives you fish, it gives you treasures and whatnot. So oil, for example. So the mother's attribute often, rightly or wrongly, in literature is as, self-sacrificial, someone who is always giving. And sea has been always and mostly represented as that, because it is life-giving, it is nurturing and so on. Of course, there are other representations as well. So that could be that can be one of the ways that you see the sea as, especially because of the sustenance that it gives to the communities nearby.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Are there any further questions?
Thank you.
So, ma'am, there are no further questions, but this is a very, very interesting topic. And I'm very proud to tell you that we have incorporated Blue Humanities in our UG syllabus and our PG syllabus. We've incorporated, subaltern studies, Blue Humanities, and disability studies. Yes.
Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And ma'am, I would also request all the panelists and everyone to please put on their camera so that we can have a photograph together. And if Dr. Shilpa is listening to me, she can also, put on her video so that we all can have a photograph together.
Yes, she's here. Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Shilpa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
ma'am.
Dr. Karinita, for accepting our invitation. It's a wonderful talk.
Thank you very much.
I request Mr. Vicky Prasad to kindly take a photograph.
Done, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you all, even though it's virtually.
Yes, ma'am. We would certainly meet offline also. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Bye. Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you all. Nice meeting you.
Same here, Mangal.
Yes,
Finally,
yeah.
we got to meet. Yeah.
Yes.
Bye. Bye.
Nice meeting you.
With this, we would like to conclude the day's deliberation. I thank you all for being with us these 2 days, and I'm sure you will continue to support us throughout this faculty development program for the coming 3 days as well. Thank you one and all. Hoping to meet you all again at sharp 10 a.m. tomorrow. Mohaminul sir has already shared the link for the Google form with the quiz questions posted in. Kindly answer the questions and reply by today, latest before the beginning of the FDP tomorrow. Thank you all so much.